welcome back to week 10 of 12 of Revenants Hiatus between chapters 10 and 11. Thanks for joining me here today. Sorry that I couldn't join you the last couple of weeks, but Judy called and I had to do some hectic work for a client, and that left me unable to work on these edits in my spare time. It turns out pulling all those old days in a row was pretty rough. But yeah, no, back for week 10, answering a couple of questions. Might be a little bit of a shorter one because of aforementioned all days. We're not out of the woods yet, but I wanted to quickly squeeze in a couple of questions this week. If you're a reader of the comic, and I'm pretty sure you are if you've gotten to this video, otherwise welcome, go read the comic, and you have a couple questions, there's literally 2 weeks left of Q&A before the comic starts. I'd maybe like to do these again sometime, but I'm not planning to do it anytime soon. Maybe it's something down the line that patrons want again or something like that. Let me know. But for now, yeah, only a couple more weeks to get in some questions that you may have on the comic in this format. Otherwise, if you have questions after that, feel free to check out the comic on Webtoons, Tapas, Comic Fury, Fur Affinity, RevenantsComic.com, and the Patreon, where you can support me, and then also have access to the Discord, where you can talk to me and ask me questions. It'll be in a typed format as opposed to a spoken format like this. So yeah, there'll always be time for other questions, but if you want to submit a few to the last couple of weeks of this format, please check the link in the description. I'll have thrown everything down there. I have my first question from djbman again, who was in the last recorded Q&A I managed to do. So thank you for more questions. I know you said as a recommendation for the video behind your questions, I could do some of the chapter 1 scenes with Tyler, but you'll notice I'm running something a little different behind this today. More on that to come later. Yeah, their question today is, have you thought about doing prologues? Basically shows how they developed before the main comic and how they were trained in secret for each character, or at least the main few, or is that going to show more at the end? And I think I might have answered a variation on this question once before. It's certainly one I do get often on the Discord and on Patreon and stuff like that, so I've definitely answered it probably a little bit all over the place, in chunks all over the place, and a couple DMs here and on the Discord there, and on a page or two on one of the websites that I'm hosting on. So it's not something I haven't answered before, but certainly I don't know if I've answered it in this format. And mostly those flashbacks and prologues are going to feature in the comic. So we've seen Emma's backstory, we've seen how she grew up in the ruins, had to hide out with Adam, has this sort of rough delinquent background that she kind of alludes to in chapter 5, and the rest of the principal Revenants team, so it'll be the twins, Jason and Brad, and Max. We do start delving into their background a little more. Todd has probably got the most vague one, and that he's got a little bit of a dream flashback in chapter 1 that shows him in like a creepy lab somewhere, but that's kind of all we see from his perspective, and the rest will sort of tell their story as they go along, and it usually comes along in vaguely important plot points. I've tried to make it that, like, early on when Todd's kind of doubting the mission, Emma's there to go like, well, get it together, guy. And later on we're going to have the twins reveal a bit about themselves, and Max will reveal something about himself, and unfortunately that's going to be like at the very end, so you're going to have to hang in there for that. But most of the backstory is kind of told in casual conversation, because that's how like real people talk, right? Like no one just sits down and says like, this is my whole life story. Only people who do that are people who are in a story and for some reason know they are in a story. I want it to fit in because they're telling an anecdote or they're kind of letting slip of something they're interested in. I want a lot of that backstory to be naturalistic, and there's literally 2 chapters where characters go, well, this is what actually happened to me, and it was pertinent to the events. At least that's what I tried to make it. And Max will be one later on, which will be told in a slightly different format, but is a little bit of, oh, this is how I got you kind of backstory. So yeah, I think most of these backstories come out in casual conversation with the sort of very special episode chapter. So there'll be like 3 chapters that give you backstory, basically, of everyone who's not Todd. The rest of it I want it to be like environmental storytelling, as they call it in gaming, basically. And then there is obviously going to be a little bit more detail into the operations of Revenants, but again, at the very end, most of it up to this point is just let slip in casual conversation. So the next question I have gotten today is delivered by John. No other details, I'm afraid, no links or anything. So John has asked, do you use a technique for keeping your characters on model and consistent throughout various poses and perspective, or do you use your own artistic judgment? Honestly, I think they just do that because I've got a little bit of same face going on, and they all kind of look the same with slightly different hair and ears, which is a lot of the reason I draw furry / anthro characters, is I get to give them different fur patterns and ear designs and sort of maybe longer or shorter snouts. But it all kind of comes down to, and you'll see in the background of these videos when I've been drawing the scenes, starting with those very simple forms, spheres for the heads. I do a slightly more ornate sort of like torso and hips design to kind of get poses like that right. Obviously reference is very important for a lot of that stuff. I could probably use it more because I tend to be a bit lazy about looking up reference, and it usually comes to bite me in the ass, especially when it comes to drawing things like hands. With a bit of a background in animation, I know that things like character sheets and that exist if you've got like lots of animators that need to all draw the same character the same way every single time. And I've never really needed that. I'm the only one working on this project, so most of it comes out of top of my head, having drawn these characters 1,000 times at this point. But I think you'll notice that they've changed over the course of the comic. I think the older drawings feel a little more stiff. Maybe hadn't quite found who all those characters looked like yet. I could have probably stood to draw them a few more times. But honestly, a webcomic is probably one of the best ways to improve drawing the same character over and over, and the best way to get stronger at illustrating characters in general, with weird poses, weird angles. I try to mix up angles where I can, even though I'm kind of picturing the scenes out how I would film them or set them up in an animation scene or something like that. So it just comes with drawing them over and over and starting with those simple forms and working away from that. And then every once in a while going, I'm not actually happy with this element on this character, and trying to just work it in next time you draw them that it looks a little better. For instance, you'll see now in chapter 11 I've changed Max's hairstyle. And the first 10 chapters I wasn't wild about it. I'm like, I wanted to do that kind of military short back and sides with like long on top, kind of like an undercut thing going on. And it never quite looked the way I wanted it to look. And I'd kind of soldier on, never got it quite right. So I deviate from that quite extremely in chapter 11, give him a new hairstyle, and I think it looks a little better. It kind of looks a little more like his design in Conspiracy to a degree. But it's an ever-evolving thing, and I think that's what comes with drawing characters over and over and drawing them in a webcomic. And then having the benefit of going, yeah, this story's taking place over like a year or something like that. Characters are going to change their hairstyle and their clothes. So I mean, yeah, I think it's that typical start with like simple forms, get the dimensions you like, experiment with them, and when you get something you like, you're going to draw them over and over. I think you're just going to get better, but sheer sort of mercy of doing that, which I think just comes with the territory. And the last one for this evening actually wasn't submitted through the Q&A, and for the life of me, I can't remember who's asked me this question. I think it might have been either on the Discord or the Patreon, given that's the kind of people who would have access to the Conspiracy. The question was along the lines of how much like sort of connective tissue is there between Revenants and the Conspiracy. So if you are following me on Patreon, you'll see I post a comic called The Conspiracy every Friday. And that was my first attempt at a long-form, quote-unquote, serious webcomic. I'd done a couple shorter slice-of-life comics that have always been popular. I mean, look at webcomics today. But this was one I was drawing in my first few years of university at Wits University in Johannesburg. I was slugging my way through an engineering degree that I hated, and I needed a creative outlet, and drawing webcomics kind of became that. And I got a little bit of traction drawing this slice-of-life comic. I was collaborating with friends at the time, and then decided I wanted to do something a little more narrative-focused. I enjoyed the slice of life, but wasn't quite where I wanted to be. They run the risk of being sort of in-jokey and sort of a bit repetitive, and there's people who can pull it off, but it wasn't me. Like, I think people can do slice of life well, and I'm not one of those people. So Conspiracy was like the first version of this story was like something I'd kind of drafted when I was in high school, early varsity, and then when I discovered furries on the internet in 2007, because I was very sheltered, I decided that they were actually a good way to add diversity to the cast, as I've mentioned 1,000 times by this point. And I started drawing The Conspiracy, and that version of the story very much had, here are some milestones I want to hit. I want Todd to do this, I want him to have this event, and this ending, and how do I connect all those together? So I had like a rough draft, and I kind of had him get from one to the other. It would kind of, pacing would get a little weird sometimes in some places. Other places I really liked what was going on, but it was much less tight than the script is. And if you look back, you'll see characters like Emma don't show up at all. So you'll see that there will be a lot of sort of overlap. I feel like it's worth reading Conspiracy just to see where something came from. Revenants follows a lot of the same treads, and then it goes past it. And then I've added characters like Emma to kind of have Todd bounce off of her and off of Josie, and both have different opinions on what he's doing because they have both different levels of understanding of what he's doing, or even knowing what he's doing. So I think it's worth seeing it because it's the bones of the story. And I had an ending in mind. It was going to be a bombastic sort of action scene, and now I kind of brought it down to something that makes a little more sense for this cast and these characters. Because back then I was very into watching Underworld with all the werewolves, and Equilibrium with Christian Bale, a very cool, if very campy action movie, and I was very into sort of that style of action at the time. And I think even before John Wick came out, I think the way I wanted to write action was a little more grounded. So Conspiracy definitely is a little more bombastic, quote-unquote, than Revenant, but partially that is predicated on the fact that instead of creepy government MK Ultra program, it was some weird collaboration between gaming corporations and the government to implant subliminal training into games, because I used to be a capital G gamer in 2007, and yeah, those parts are probably why the Revenant's plot got so heavily revised, because it felt a little like sort of childish and basic, and I think I way prefer the way that it is shaping up now with this sort of more MK Ultra, little bit conspiratorial, kind of grey area in reality whether this would be a thing or not. But yeah, I think it's worth reading The Conspiracy if you're on Patreon. I probably will make it public again sooner or later, because I don't, you know, it's not nice having it behind a paywall, but it is a nice thing to have as a little bonus for my patrons for now. So maybe when Revenants wraps up, and I'll start making those pages public too, because I think it's nice to see, even though they are deeply terrible, what the foundation of sort of Revenants in Conspiracy is definitely worth reading, I think. Yeah, so a little bit more all over the place today. Like I say, I've really had to squeeze this in between a couple of all days. Going to pull a slightly later one than usual tonight to edit this one up and have it uploaded. So if you want to submit questions to the last couple of Q&As for the webcomic, feel free to click the link down in the description. Go read the webcomic and all those links I mentioned before. And if you can't find or remember all those links, they're all on revenantscomic.com. And then be sure to check out Patreon, for where I spend most of my time with people supporting me, and the Discord attached to that. But I'm also on Ko-fi if you want to just kick a couple bucks my way. I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, no, thank you for joining me this evening, and I will hopefully see you next week with another Q&A session. Cheers.